Hello all. So today we're going to be going over the grading standards for the paper. Um, I'm going to do two more videos and then we'll be done, and I think I'll just do them back to back today. So regarding the grading standards, I thought it'd be useful for you to have some sort of rubric in order to know what you should and shouldn't do. Hopefully the other materials I've provided have already been useful, but this should help as well. So in resources on the Scholar site, week 6, there's grading standards. Um, a good way to listen to this video would be to go open that document and then just read along. So rather than just watching me talk, you can look at the grading standards along with me and maybe make notes if need be. So I'm just going to be referring to the grading standards as I read them off my computer. So it'll be helpful for you to do the same thing. So starting here, the first standard is how well does the author organize the essay around a clear central thesis. So this is just the first standard is checking for the thesis, and most important thing to look for here is that you make some sort of original contribution. As you'll notice, that's the difference between the 90 to 100 range and the 80 to 90 range. So what's important here is that you go above and beyond text and develop a clear thesis that isn't just derivative of what's already been said, right? So if you have a thesis that's, Descartes argues for the existence of God, and that's your thesis, that's not really doing any sort of independent interpretive work to try to make sense of what happens in the meditations. That's already taken as a given, so that cannot get you into the A range. So an A range thesis will be one that clearly explains what your argument is and how you get there, and does more than say what's already kind of been said. You have to try to provide a resolution to the problem of induction, or you have to have some original insight about whatever you chose to write on. And that should be clear enough, but hopefully that helps a little bit. And I'm only going to emphasize, the A and B range ones, because hopefully no one's shooting for a C and a D range. So moving on to the second standard now, how well does the essay use evidence from the sources read and discussed in class, example citations, etc., from the assigned text to support its assertions? So this one just really checks to see how well you integrate the readings into your paper. Of course, you're going to be referencing all sorts of materials that we've read. You can't do this paper without making some sort of reference to what's an impression, what's an idea, for example, if you're doing the Hume writings. So it's just checking to see how effectively you do that. If you put it in the appropriate place, if the things are related in the appropriate way, right? So a trivial example would be if you identify that, for example, I guess all ideas are derived from impressions or something like that. If you say all impressions are derived from ideas, that would be problematic. Another thing that we'll look for is just kind of the smoothness of how well integrated it is, if it's presented at the appropriate place, if it's thoroughly and appropriately explained. Something you should do is you should always explain any sort of quote or citation you give. So especially when you do a direct quote, right, you put a sentence in quotation marks or a sentence or two. After you've done that, what you need to do is you need to say what Hume is saying here, or what Gettier is saying is, and explain it more thoroughly. Don't let quotes stand on their own. Don't let them speak for themselves. Do some work to make sense of what's being said. Likewise, you should never just make a sentence a quote of its own. You have to introduce quotes by saying, David Hume wrote, comma, quote, and then add the quote. The quote shouldn't just be its own standalone sentence. So another thing that'll be really useful is the use of examples, right? So a lot of times these ideas can be fairly strange. Like maybe if you're talking about the distinction between ideas and impressions or something like that, you want to clarify what you mean by using an example that you came up with to show that you understand the material or to help the reader along. So that'll be another way in which you show this sort of textual evidence. You use it more appropriately. The next criteria is how well does the essay respond to the prompt, and this one is really important because part of what I tried to do in all of the prompts that I created for you is develop the prompt in such a way that you could follow the questions and answer them in order, and if you do that, you'll be well on your way towards having a good, reasonably organized paper. So responding to the prompt, all parts of the prompt, and in order will be very helpful. I mean, I don't fill in every step for you, so you might need a paragraph here or there to make some link that isn't explicit in the prompt for you. I didn't write the paper for you, of course. But for the most part, the best way to do well in this regard is to answer all parts of the prompt, right? So there'll be 3 or 4 questions and maybe one sort of command that's given in the prompt. Do all of those 5 or 4 steps. And if you do that, that should really be helpful in you doing well on this assignment. Another important thing to do is when you respond to the prompt, so the initial portion of any paper in this sort of course is going to be an exposition in which you make sense of the writings, right? So you're just going to give Hume's arguments or Getier's arguments or what Descartes says about bodies and minds, and then distinct from that, you'll give your own original presentation of what you have to say on that material. And it's really essential that you do those sorts of things separately, because of course you want to give the material a fair shake, and then after you've given it a good, clean, fair presentation, then you can go about objecting to it or supporting it. But of course it'll come off as terribly biased if before you've clearly and fairly presented it, you're already objecting to it. It'll just seem loaded from the outset. Yeah, so keeping those 2 parts separate. So the first 3/4 of the paper or something like that should be that sort of exposition portion, and then the last quarter or third will be your original thoughts and arguments, and it should be distinct. And like I've noted before, you can use signposts or something like that and just say, now I will argue that the problem of induction can be resolved by the following considerations, or just some clear designation of how you're going to proceed in your independent argument. And then the final criteria that I have here is how well does the essay explain the concepts and arguments assigned in the question. And this is just kind of checking for key concepts. It's kind of already integrated into some of the earlier comments that I mentioned, but it'll be really essential that you get the concepts right. And some of them are trickier than others, but this is just sort of the kind of foundational exposition factor. So if you're writing on, whatever, say Mackey, right? You do your own independent paper and write on the problem of evil. An essential thing for you to do is to get the problem of evil correct and to identify the fallacious solutions and clearly lay out why he thinks they're fallacious solutions before you argue against them. And if you don't clearly define the key terms, like what he thinks omnipotence means or what he thinks evil is or something like that, you're not going to be able to do well on this assignment. So just as a rule of thumb, don't presuppose that I, as a reader, know anything about this field. Think of it as just your friend, your roommate could read this paper and get something out of it because all of the important details are filled in for them. So I hope that's helpful. Please ask questions. One final note is that, of course, these points won't exactly correspond to the weighting in your paper, because this would make it out of 400 points instead of 300 points, but this is just supposed to designate, 90 to 100 is like a range. Think of it that way. It doesn't mean literally 100 points. If you did a perfect paper, you're not going to get 400 out of 300 points. Okay, I'll post one more, and that'll be it. So thank you for your time.